Hi guys, in today's video we're going to be painting a sepulchral guard miniature from start to finish. But first of all I want to say a huge thank you to the guys over at Goblin Gaming who sent me the box set out for review. If you check the description box down below you'll find a direct link to their web store, and every time you purchase something from that link it greatly helps my YouTube channel. So please use the link in the description box below. In this tutorial I wanted to paint the miniature up to a very basic tabletop standard. Now the reason for this is I want this video to be aimed at the absolute beginner to the hobby. So I'm not going to do any airbrushing in this video. I'm going to paint the miniature from start to finish just with one brush predominantly. I think I may use a larger brush when I prime the miniature, but we'll go over that as the tutorial starts. But it's really important that new people join in and have fun with the hobby. So I'm going to tag as many of my old videos as I can in this video so I can get as many people to watch this as possible. And if I could ask a favour guys, please share this video on your social medias to people that you think may be interested in getting into the hobby. I'd really appreciate it. Well anyway, as always this is going to be a very long video indeed, longer than my normal videos I believe, so go grab yourselves a nice hot drink or maybe a nice ice cold beer and we'll get started with the tutorial. The miniature that you see used in this video is from the Sepulchral Guard Warhammer Underworlds box set that you can get from Goblin Gaming for just £14 for 7 miniatures. We're painting the first miniature from the box set here, which is the actual leader of the warband. It's important that we prime the miniature first of all to make sure that the paint goes onto the miniature nice and smooth. The primer that we're using is from the Army Painter and it's specifically made to be brushed onto the miniature. If you're new to the hobby, I really highly recommend that you don't just paint on the bare plastic and you prime the miniature first. This Army Painter primer can be picked up for about £2.30 or there and thereabouts from Goblin Gaming. The Army Painter brush on primer was placed onto the palette and I didn't need to thin it down at all to place on the miniature, and as you can see it goes on very smooth indeed. And here you can see what the miniature looks like after the primer had been applied to the miniature. None of that beautiful detail has been lost on the miniature, and now we've got a nice smooth even surface that gives a nice tooth to the actual miniature for subsequent layers of paint to adhere to. We're going to start off by using Games Workshop base paint called Red. The base paint range from Games Workshop is absolutely fantastic and is designed to give almost one coat coverage. It's very important that we add our paint to a palette. You can use an old CD, a Tupperware lid, or as I'm using here, a wet palette. But the most important thing is to thin down the paint with a little bit of water, as you can see I'm doing here. The reason we thin the paint down is not to get more volume from the paint. The reason we thin it down is to get nice smooth even paint coverage on the miniature. The paint will flow much better off the paintbrush and it also won't leave behind brush stroke marks that can look unsightly and spoil the look of a miniature. And here you can see what the cloak looked like after it's nearly dried. Now we're going to use chainmail silver from Vallejo Game Air. I've got to be honest guys that some of the Games Workshop metallics are not very good, especially their silver type metallics. So I believe it's called Lead Belcher, is not the best. So I do recommend that you don't stick to one brand and you use multiple brands to get the best results. But here you can see I've thinned down the chainmail silver a little, and we're just going to start placing it on all of the armor panels of the Sepulchral Guard miniature. Not all of Games Workshop paints are bad, metallics are bad. Their base paint, Balthazar Gold, is really nice, but it's very crucial that you give these paints a really thorough mix. And by that I mean maybe adding some agitators like some beads into the pot, shaking it thoroughly, and then it will mix up the metallics really nicely. We're just going to be painting certain areas on the Sepulchral Guard miniature using the Balthazar Gold. Now we're going to paint some more details on the miniature using Games Workshop's Mournfang Brown. So we're going to be painting the base. We're also going to be painting the fur trim around the top of his cape. We're also going to paint the belt that he has on his waist. Now we're going to paint the little stone that's on the base using Games Workshop base paint Mechanica Standard Grey. Games Workshop Sandry Dust is going to be painted on all of the bone areas of the miniature. It's important to note, guys, that I don't show it every single time on this video, but I always thin the paint down with a little water. You don't want to obscure any of that beautiful detail, so just take the time to add just a tiny amount of water and the results from your painting of the miniature will be so much better. And here you can see what the miniature looks like after all the base layers of paint have been applied to the miniature. Now we're going to start by adding washes to the miniature. We're going to start off by washing the cape using Games Workshop's Drucci Violet. It's very important with washes that are very thin that we don't let them pull too much on the surface of the miniature. The reason that we don't let them pull on the surface of the miniature is you'll leave a lot more staining on the miniature, and also if there's too much of the wash pooling on the miniature, it can drip off on the miniature onto surfaces, and also it can drip off onto other areas of the miniature, spoiling the look of it. And here you can see what the cape looks like after the Drucci Violet had thoroughly dried. All the metallics on the miniature are going to be washed with Games Workshop Shade Null Nile. Now we're going to use Games Workshop Shade Agrax Shade, and we're going to be placing this on the base of the miniature, on all of the Xandri dust areas of bone that we painted, and any area that was painted in Mornfang brown. And here's a look at the miniature after all of the different washes have been applied to the miniature. As you can see, the miniature's already starting to look good, but now we're going to take it a step further by adding highlights to the miniature. We're going to go back over the cape now using Games Workshop's base paint Corn Red and Mephiston Red in a 50-50 mix. Here you can see that I'm mixing them together on the palette, and I've added some water just to thin the paint down. Now I'm going to apply it to the miniature, but I'm going to avoid all of the recesses of the cape. The reason for this is we're going to want to leave the shade behind to make certain areas of the cape pop out and look way more three-dimensional. And here you can see what the cape looks like after applying all of that 50-50 mix of paint to the cape, leaving the original paint behind in all the recesses. Now we're going to use Games Workshop Layer Paint Wild Rider Red, and this technique is called hard edge highlighting. What that means is just the very extreme sharp edges of the miniature is going to be applied with paint. So all of the really sharp folds of the cape get applied with the Wild Rider Red, and the very edges of the cape as well. This is an effect paint from the army painter called Dry Rust. Now we're not going to paint it out of the bottle straight, we're going to heavily dilute it. So we're going to dilute it until it almost becomes a wash, as you can see on the palette. The reason for this is we want it to collect in all of the recesses of the armour to make it look like authentic rust. Now we're going to use Games Workshop's technical paint, Nicolac Oxide. Don't let the word technical put you off, as it's very simple to use. What we do is thin down the Nicolac Oxide with a little water, because it's very strong out of the bottle, as you can see as I've applied it here. So I add a bit of water to the brush, and as you can see, it's starting to look like a patina that's added to the shield. Now we're going to dry brush the miniature using Games Workshop Zandri Dust. Dry brushing is a technique where we use a flat-headed brush and we apply a small amount to the tips of the bristles, and then we scrub the bristles dry almost on some paper towel or here on some paper, and once most of the paint had been removed off the bristles, we can then get a really nice effect on the parts that we're painting. Now we're going to start painting over the miniature in a technique called layer painting, similar to what we did on the cloak. We're actually going to paint the Ashabti bone onto all areas of the skull, but leaving all the Zandri dust that was washed with Agrax Earthshade in all of the recesses. So be very careful. Make sure you take your time here, because the face is the most important part of a miniature and it's the thing that you're drawn to look at the most. Now we're going to create even more highlights using Games Workshop's Layer Paint Screaming Skull. Just as before, we're avoiding all of the recesses of the miniature, and this time I'm only going for the sharp areas, so where there's a crack in the skull, the very tops of the eye sockets and the teeth area of the skull. Now we're going to highlight all the armour plating of the miniature using Vallejo Game Air Silver. This is a beautiful colour, but it's very bright indeed, so it's important that we only touch the extreme edges of the areas with this metallic paint, and what we'll be left with is a really nice effect if we do that. And here we have our finished Sepulchral Guard miniature. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, guys. As I said, I've taken more care and effort in this video than I do on most of my tutorials to try and break down the techniques and exactly what I'm doing. That's why this video has gone on for nearly 40 minutes, even longer than my regular tutorials. I just want to say a huge thank you once again for my YouTube channel sponsors, Goblin Gaming, who, if it wasn't for them, this tutorial wouldn't be possible. So check the description box below. If you are going to buy anything from Goblin Gaming, please use that link, as it greatly helps me. Lastly, guys, please put a comment below. Let me know what you think of the video. Let me know what type of tutorial you may want to see in future. I do listen to requests, guys, and I do try to get round to painting different subjects as and when I can. And very lastly and finally, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.